Well, I guess in that case. All right. Hosea part 32. I'm just going on what the last one said. It was 31. So hopefully we're in the right spot. This is a long one. It's 2 pages. So, um, but there's a lot of stuff in. This is Hosea chapter 10, verses 9 and 10. And there's some stuff that we should pay attention to in these 2 verses. Verse 11 kind of starts a new idea, so we kind of get a break with a little bitty one. But let's talk to our Elohim, and then we'll take a look at another message that Hosea is passing on to Israel that maybe we should also be more aware of. And Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for the opportunity to study your word. We thank you, Father, for the opportunity to look within ourselves and find out where our priorities are. We ask that you'll open our eyes and open our ears and open our hearts so we can see, hear, and understand what your word tells us. So we thank you for it. In the name of Yahushua, amen. All right, so we'll dive in. We'll start with chapter 10, or chapter 10, verse 10. It says, "From the days of Gibeah you have sinned, O Israel. There they stood. No battle was to overtake them in Gibeah, nor the children of arrogance." Okay, so what does all that mean? Do we have a history of anything that's happened in Gibeah? So let's consider first, from the days of Gibeah you have sinned, O Israel. So let's take a look at Gibeah as a place. Gibeah was the birthplace of King Saul. And he was the first of the kings that would replace Yahuwah as king. So what we can consider from this is that the beginning of sin was to reject Yahuwah and replace him with a physical king. And this is in 1 Samuel chapter 8. I'm just going to take a real quick look. Chapter 8, verses 1, 3, 5, 7, and 20. It's the Cliff Notes version of the whole thing. But it says, "And it came to be when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. But his sons did not walk in his ways and turned aside after their own gain and took bribes and twisted right ruling. And Israel gathered together, and they said to Samuel, 'Appoint for us a sovereign to rule us like all the nations.' So Samuel sought Yahuwah, and Yahuwah said to Samuel, 'Listen to the voice of the people and all they say to you, for they have not rejected you, they have rejected me from reigning over them.'" And then in verse 20 says, we also like the nations, and our sovereign shall rule over us and go out before us and fight our battles." Okay, so what is the sin that's going on here? First of all, it starts by something that causes our belief system to get out of alignment. What happened is it says that Samuel was old and he made. The word that's used for made there is sum. That this word actually means to appoint. To ordain. So he ordained someone, Samuel did, to rule over the people. Where did the other judges come from? Well, we have a list of judges throughout the book of Judges, except for a few of them. These come afterwards, but all of these were lifted up by Yahuwah. And these are the ones that went out and directed the people truthfully. What was the reason that Eli's sons had been put to death? Because they had started to become corrupt, and they were in it for their own gain. And this came back on Eli, and the same thing is going on with Samuel, who's appointed now his sons. He ordained them to take care of the people. What were the rules of ordination, so to speak, within the Torah? Within the Torah, if I am if we're going to take a priest into the priesthood to serve us, it's the community's responsibility, along with Moses. The whole community gets involved in this process of appointing or ordaining. So now you've got someone in there that is corrupt. So is corruption of something a cause for Israel to say to Samuel, we want to have a king like everyone else? But is having a king like everyone else, is that still going to keep them from being taken advantage of? And this is what these verses prior to verse 20 are saying, that okay, you can have a king, but here's what's going to happen. He's going to rule over you. He's going to force you to work in the military. He's going to force you to do this. He's going to force your wives to be bakers and all this other stuff, and you're going to have to pay taxes and all this other stuff. Stuff that you don't have to do now. But what we're getting at here, though, is that a difficulty caused them to reject Yahuwah Elohim and ask for a physical king. So could we consider this to be a violation of the second commandment against replacing Yahuwah with another mighty one and then bowing before him? We've taken Yahuwah, who says, I am Yahuwah Elohim. I'm the one who has brought you out of Israel, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other Elohim before me. Elohim means a mighty one, a ruler, a judge. So you shall have no other Elohim before me. The second commandment says, don't make anything under heaven, on the earth, and the heavens, and the seas, and make it, or replace me with it, and then bow down to it. That's what the second commandment says. So we can consider then that one of the sins of Gibeah, from the days of Gibeah they have sinned, one of those sins is the rejection of Yahuwah Elohim and replacing Yahuwah with another mighty one. Something else to consider about Gibeah is that it was also one of the high places used in false worship of other deities. So again, in that we have a violation of the first three commandments. The first one says, I am Yahuwah your Elohim. I'm the one who brought you out of all your mess. Don't have any other Elohim. Then it says, don't make any other Elohim and bow down to it. And then the third commandment is, don't do away with my name and replace it with something else. So what is it from the days of Gibeah you have sinned? That you rejected Yahuwah, your Elohim, and you've continued to reject Yahuwah, your Elohim. And when Yahuwah gave Jeroboam the opportunity to become a mighty kingdom again, you rejected Yahuwah Elohim and set up your own deities. So what he's saying is, your transgression continues to be the exact same thing, the rejection of Yahuwah as your Elohim. So, from the days of Gibeah you have sinned, we can consider that Israel's sin began when they rejected Yahuwah as king, and then as Elohim. So this opens the door for a question that we must consider. Has anything in my belief system replaced Yahuwah as my king and my Elohim? And it's a question to seriously consider. I mean, getting this close to Yom Teruah and then Yom Kippur, has anything replaced Yahuwah as my king and my Elohim? And we can all say, no, I would never do that until I hit my finger with a hammer, and then I forget everything, and something else becomes my Elohim, or until something happens in my life and then I forget my Elohim, because we're human, we go to guns right away, and that's the problem becomes Elohim. So we can take this and bring it in closer, but for Israel's sake, Hoshea is telling them, hey, you've rejected Elohim, Yahuwah your Elohim, over and over and over, and you've trusted in what you can do over and over and over. So, the book of Hosea makes a good use of its references to helical time. We saw that kind of in the last study. It uses the word heifer, that comes from the root habal, that means to revolve, and it uses several other words that talk about revolution. I don't know what was in those grapes, but anyway. So makes good use of the idea of helical time. What we're considering as a message to the house of Israel is also a message that we today must pay attention to. So we're coming up on the holidays, time that we really should be reflecting. Even now, coming up to Yom Teruah should be a time of reflection. Where am I? And what is my relationship with my Elohim? Have I rejected my Elohim in anything during my life that maybe I need to make teshuvah and start to rebuild my relationship with? So the next phrase, there they stood, no battle was to overtake them in Gibeah. Well, that sounds good. We've rejected our Elohim, and no battle is going to overtake us. In fact, no battle is going to overtake us, and no children of arrogance is going to overtake us, because that's how we read this. So let's read it something that we like to call the right way. There they stood, not to overtake in battle at Gibeah. So that kind of changes things. There, instead of this idea, no battle was to overtake them, there they stood, not to overtake in a battle against Gibeah. So they can't win in this conflict when they reject Yahuwah as their Elohim. So let me get back before I get way ahead of myself, and then we can just let it go. All right, so the word for there they stood is amadu, from the root amadu, which it should be in Hebrew, but it's not, so that's okay. Amad also means to remain or to stand still. This word can also represent developing an attitude towards something. So we can also consider that not only did Israel reject Yahuwah as their Elohim, they stopped any type of movement towards teshuvah, and then they developed an attitude against the worship of Yahuwah Elohim, in that basically we don't want to have anything to do with what the kingdom of Yehuda is doing. And if we talk about the helical thing, this thing would show itself up again in the 4th century, when the church fathers there at the councils of Nicaea would say, we don't want to have anything to do with the feasts and festivals of the Jews or the Torah of the Jews, because we have a New Testament, and all that stuff in the Old Testament no longer applies to us. So the word can also represent developing an attitude towards something. A word that we must seriously consider is the word used for not, which in this case is lo. That it is a choice not to do something, as opposed to al, which is a command to not do something. So here is this no. There they stood, not to overtake. The choice, whether they overtake or not overtake, is theirs to make, and they choose not to overtake. They've chosen not to, well, let's get on to the word overtake so we can figure that out. So from this we can consider that Israel chose to stand still, remain in sin, and then developed an attitude regarding the worship of Yahuwah. We find this also within the, I don't know what to call them, within the verses and the chapters in Hosea, or not in Hosea, but in the prophets themselves. We know that the northern kingdom was offered the opportunity to come for the second Passover. We've talked about this a few times. They refused. They said, no, we're not going to do that. So they chose to remain in this arrogant attitude that they were in. Even though they realized that basically the walls were closing in. They were in very serious trouble with the Assyrians, and the Babylonians were really starting to show their teeth. The Egyptians were starting to say, hey, you know, you deal with us, we'll help you to fight them, even though the Egyptians were also having problems with the Assyrians and the Babylonians as well. So they chose to remain in sin, and they developed an attitude regarding the worship of Yahuwah. So this would pose a question for us to answer. Have I become stifled in my relationship with my Elohim? Have I developed an attitude towards His Word that keeps me from being able to move forward in a truthful relationship? You know, it's not just about history, and it's not just about prophetic this and that. But these lessons that we learn from all of the prophets also force us to ask ourselves questions. And these are important questions because Israel, the northern kingdom, had seriously fallen away. The southern kingdom was also going back and forth in a wishy-washy motion. So when we ask these questions, have I become stifled in my relationship with my Elohim? Have I developed an attitude towards His Word that keeps me from being able to move forward in a truthful relationship? It's very serious questions that we really need to look inside, because we're trying to answer that question, where am I? So it was because of this that they stood not to overtake in the battle at Gibeah. The word for overtake is tasigem, that from the root nasag means to depart from or to move away from. The word for battle is michama, that from the root lacham means to consume. So what we can consider is Israel chose to stand still, remain in sin, and then developed an attitude regarding the worship of Yahuwah, which resulted in their being consumed by their decision. They can't win against a decision where you choose not to do something, and then whether it's right or wrong, you develop an attitude because I don't care what you say, I know I'm wrong, but I'm not going to let you know that I'm wrong. So I'm going to continue going in a direction of something that's going to cause me injury or cause me separation. We see this we do this all the time. You know, I know this isn't going to work. I know I'm wrong, but I've already committed to it, and I don't want anybody to see that there's a possibility that I may be wrong. I mean, I was wrong once, but turns out I was only mistaken. Yeah, so, all right. So, as a result, they could not overcome being children of arrogance. Their pride got in the way. And when pride gets in the way, you're not going to back down and make teshuvah. You're not going to recognize that you're wrong because you don't want the world to see that maybe you made a mistake. So as we move forward towards Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, this concept is one that we must take a look at in our condition. Where are we in relation to this concept? So let's consider verse 10. Verse 10. That says, "It is my desire that I should chastise them." There goes that evil God of the Old Testament punishing. "It is my desire that I should chastise them, and the people shall be gathered against them when they are yoked to their two rings." Well, that sounds kind of cryptic. So let's consider the phrase, "It is my desire that I should chastise them." So let's first consider the word for that I should chastise them, which is ve'esorem, that from the root yesar means to discipline, to correct, to teach, and to instruct. So here we can consider a question. Does Yahuwah our Elohim desire to punish us, or does He desire to discipline and correct us through His instruction and teaching? We talked about it, I think, last week or the week before, that this phrase drives a lot of people crazy sometimes because they get tired of hearing it, but it's so true. Everything that Yahuwah Elohim allows to happen, He allows to happen for a reason. And we use that, when somebody's really having a hard time, we say, well, this is going to comfort you. But people don't listen to that. It kind of upsets people, that But if we'll consider that everything that Yahuwah Elohim allows to happen, he allows to happen for a reason, are we looking at the problem, or are we looking at the possibilities of what this problem or what this issue or what this circumstance is teaching us so that we can grow? We did the number problem on the board the other day, right? With the 7 times 1 equals 9, and okay. But that's where we are, is that we focus on the one thing that's wrong, and we don't focus on all the other things that are right, and it leads us into a problem. So it isn't Elohim's desire to punish us, it's his desire to discipline and correct us through his instruction and teaching. Yahuwah chose one time specifically in the Torah to bring punishment to humankind, and that humankind was out of control. He flooded the earth and destroyed all the life on the face of it. If it was Yahuwah's desire to punish, would he not repeat this act? He would not have said, I feel bad about what just happened. I'm not going to do that again. I've given them an ark. I filled it with clean and unclean things. And I gave them the choice to either enter into the ark to learn the difference between what's clean and what's not clean, or to drown. And he's given us the same thing. We have the Word. We have the Torah. We have the prophets. We have the Besorah. We have Yahushua that explained it to us and then gave his life so that we could basically have a restored life that we were supposed to have in the first place. But we have all this stuff that we need not be punished. We simply need to pay attention when situations go south. But he's telling Israel, I'm going to send you teaching. I'm going to send you instruction. I'm going to send you something that's going to discipline you and correct you and hopefully open your eyes, is what he's saying. It's not, I'm going to punish you with the wrath of the evil God of the Old Testament. So the concept throughout the Bible is the concept of the threshing floor, removing the fruit from the chaff, the fruit to be stored into barns and the chaff to be destroyed. The choice is to build a relationship with Yahuwah as King and Elohim and be gathered within him, or to reject Yahuwah as King and Elohim and be removed from his presence. And this is a concept that we will consider in this verse. Yahuwah's desire is to instruct us in discipline, just as it was to instruct and correct the house of Israel. Just as Israel had rejected him as King and Elohim, he would discipline, correct, and instruct them by allowing another people to rise up against them so that they could experience the destructive nature of human kings. Okay? All the kings that they had were still Jewish kings, so to speak. Let's give you some real kings. Let's give you the kings of the nations that you are so madly in love with. Here it says, but they said, appoint for us a sovereign to rule us like all the nations. So let me show you what a king is, like all the other nations. So something is about to happen to them. So the choice is to build, where were we? Okay. This is a concept we're going to consider in this verse. Yahuwah's desire is to instruct us in discipline. He would discipline and instruct them by allowing another people to rise up against them so they could experience the destructive nature of human kings. We can consider this idea in the phrase, and the people shall be gathered against them when they are yoked to their 2 rings. This is a rather prophetic statement. The word used for rings is ainotam, that means strength and might. It represents power. Israel is going to have people come against them, and they will be yoked to 2 powers. So which 2 powers were they going to be yoked to? They'd be yoked to Assyria first, and then they'd be yoked to Babylon. Then, since they didn't bother to come back when they were given the opportunity to come back, they would continue to be yoked by all the powers that would follow after them. The word used for they will be yoked is be'aseram, from the root asar, that means to be tied up or put in chains and be taken prisoner. So what happened to Israel? They were allowed to stay in their land and be fruitful and multiply and keep their houses and their wealth and all this? Or were they bound in chains and taken away to Assyria, and then bound in chains and taken away to Babylon, to where the northern kingdom basically totally and completely ceased to exist? What this verse is saying is that Israel is going to have people come against them, and that they will be taken away in chains by two powers. So first will come Assyria, and then will come Babylon. Yahuwah will use these foreign kingdoms and their physical kings to discipline and instruct Israel, desiring that they should correct their way to make teshuvah. The southern kingdom made teshuvah. They came back to Jerusalem. Under Ezra and Nehemiah, they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. They rebuilt the temple. They found the scroll of Deuteronomy. They read the scroll, and they sat in sackcloth and ashes and fasted and cried and mourned, because they realized that they had totally and completely abandoned Yahuwah their Elohim and his Torah. Israel, the northern kingdom, kind of just assimilated into the Gentiles. So there's a choice. Do I assimilate in to what everyone else is doing because I don't want to take the heat? Or do I go back to my Elohim? Do I make teshuvah, step away from the captivity, and go back to my Elohim and rebuild my relationship according to his word and make him king and my Elohim again? So I should have put that in the notes. It sounds pretty good. So what we can take away from this idea is a question to consider. Do I consider tribulation in my life as punishment from a loving Elohim, or do I look at tribulation in my life as yielding lessons that I must take the opportunity to make teshuvah? So, obviously, this was a short study, but the questions that it poses are of great importance. We must look at ourselves during this period of reflection and truly ascertain where we are and what steps forward or backward we must take in discovering truth versus falsehood in our relationship with Yahuwah, our King, and our Elohim. So we end it with a very familiar question: where are you? You know, it's not always about going forward, and there's sometimes that we've gone too far forward and we have to stop where we are and go backwards and correct the path that we were taking in the relationship with our Elohim. We're all doing that, and we will all do that for some time to come, because we all struggle with dogma that's existed for a long, long time that we have to figure out: is this real? Is this according to the word of Yahuwah, my Elohim? Or is it something that replaced Yahuwah, my Elohim, with another sovereign? So, in saying that, I guess we just say grooviness has been achieved, and